Warning: this story is based on true events and includes dramatized elements for narrative purposes. I was once built to be a loving home, but now I hold the silent truth of a horrific crime. This is the story from the house of the Watts family. The steady rhythm of a hammer striking nails fills the air, each metallic ping resonating through my bones, settling deep into my frame. Around me, the scent of freshly sawn wood blends with the earthy smell of dirt, and I feel the warmth of the sun casting long shadows across my foundation. I can sense what they're creating, something more than just a structure. Every touch, every nail driven into place, adds weight and meaning to my existence. I'm not just any house. No, I was built with intention, with dreams and hopes woven into my walls right from the start. It was a warm summer day when Shanann and Chris Watts first set eyes on me. I could feel their excitement, their nervous energy bouncing off my walls as they wandered through, imagining what I might become. For them, I wasn't just a place to live. I was their future. I was the space where their family would grow, where their lives would unfold. As the final touches were added, fresh paint on the walls, new carpets laid across my floors, the air inside me felt electric with possibility. Shanann's footsteps echoed as she moved from room to room, imagining where each piece of furniture would go, where each picture would hang. Chris, steady and sure, looked at my walls and saw stability, safety. Together, they filled me with their vision, their love, and I felt it all seep into every crevice. I wasn't just a house anymore. I was their home. Time moved slowly in those first days, as they unpacked their lives and settled in. The hum of the refrigerator, the soft rustle of fabric as curtains were hung, the quiet sounds of everyday life began to settle into me. And with each passing day, I felt more like them, an extension of their hearts, their dreams. Their laughter began to fill my rooms, bouncing off the walls like sunlight streaming through the windows. I soaked it all in, every joyful moment, every shared glance, every whispered word. I became a part of them, and they became a part of me. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. Soon, the pitter-patter of tiny feet began to echo through my hallways. Bella, with her wide-eyed curiosity, was the first to come. Her laughter was like music, filling every corner of me with warmth and light. She had this way of exploring, her little hands touching everything, as if trying to memorize the feel of my walls, my floors, my windows. And every time she laughed, I felt alive. I remember the day Celeste was born. There was an air of anticipation, a quiet hum of energy that filled the house before they even brought her home. And when they did, oh, how my heart swelled. Her giggles were infectious, her presence adding another layer of warmth to my rooms. Now, there were two little voices, two little spirits, filling me with joy. Bella and Celeste brought a kind of magic with them, a sense of wonder that seemed to radiate from their very being. Every corner of me felt touched by their innocence. Shanann, always bustling about, was the heartbeat of the home. She filled the air with the smell of cookies baking, her laughter ringing out as she played with the girls. Her energy was boundless, always moving, always creating. And as the girls grew, so did the life inside me. I became a canvas for their creativity, finger painting, stickers, colourful crafts scattered across the floors. My walls were no longer just walls. They were a part of the family, holding their memories, their moments of joy. Chris, quieter but steady, would come home from work and collapse into the couch. The soft groan of the cushions under his weight a familiar sound. He was the calm to Shannon's storm, his presence grounding the whirlwind of activity that surrounded him. Every evening, as the sun set and the house quieted, I could feel the peace that settled over them all. Life inside me was good. I felt full, whole. Every day was a new story, every moment a new memory. And I held it all, every laugh, every tear, every quiet moment of reflection. I was more than just a house. I was a witness to their lives, a silent observer of their love. And then there was Dieter the family dog, that little ball of energy with his wagging tail and eager eyes. From the moment they brought him home, he was a constant presence, his tiny feet tapping across my floors, his nose sniffing out every corner of every room. He was a small dog with a big heart, and he made me feel alive in a different way. His joy was infectious, and the girls adored him. Weekends were special. The family would pile into the car, Dieter included, and head out for adventures. But I could always tell when they were coming back. The sound of the garage door opening, the excited chatter of the girls, the shuffle of feet as they kicked off their shoes and collapsed into the comfort of my living room. The smell of freshly baked cookies would soon follow, Shanann in the kitchen, while the girls sat at the table, coloring or crafting. Those weekends were my favorite. The house felt alive, buzzing with the energy of togetherness. Chris would fire up the grill in the backyard, the smell of sizzling meat wafting through the open windows. Laughter would fill the air as the girls ran around, Dieter chasing after them with his little legs pumping as fast as they could go. Shanann and Chris, side by side, would watch with smiles on their faces. Their love for each other and their family shone clear in every glance, every touch. And in those moments, I felt complete. I was more than just walls and windows. I was a part of their family, a part of their joy. I held their laughter in my beams, their love in my foundation. I was their home, and they were my heartbeat. The doorbell would ring, and the house would come alive in a different way. Friends and neighbors would pour in, filling my rooms with conversation and laughter. Nathan, the neighbor from across the street, was a frequent visitor. He had a way of lighting up the space, his stories and jokes bringing warmth to every gathering. I could feel the connection, the sense of community that wrapped around me like a protective blanket. Nicole, Shannan's best friend, was another regular presence. Whenever she was over, the kitchen became the heart of the house. The smell of coffee and baked goods would fill the air, and their conversations, sometimes deep and meaningful, would echo through my walls. I could feel the bond between them, a friendship that was as solid as the foundation I was built on. These moments, these gatherings, filled me with a sense of purpose. I wasn't just a home for one family. I was a place where connections were made, where friendships blossomed. The sound of clinking glasses, the rustle of plates being passed around, the laughter that filled the air, it all became a part of me, woven into the fabric of my being. As time passed, though, I began to notice subtle changes. At first, it was small things. Moments of silence where there used to be laughter, whispered conversations that I couldn't quite catch. Chris seemed quieter, more withdrawn, his presence in the house feeling heavy in a way it hadn't before. Time moves differently inside a home like me. I noticed the smallest shifts, the way footsteps sound heavier, the way voices lower. Chris, who once brought stability to Shanann's whirlwind energy, started feeling different. He moved through my rooms quietly, a man weighed down by thoughts too heavy for words. I could sense it in the way he would pause in the doorway before entering a room, as if gathering himself for whatever waited inside. Shanann noticed it too. She kept moving, kept filling the air with her busy energy. But underneath the bright smiles, there was a tension. It slipped into the corners of my rooms, a presence that felt heavier with each passing day. I remember the way her eyes would follow him when he wasn't looking, searching for something in him that wasn't there anymore. Chris, once so full of life, now seemed consumed by shadows. His late nights and distracted phone calls echoed through my halls, each ringing tone a reminder of something hidden, something unspoken. The phone calls that made him nervous, the texts he quickly dismissed, all felt like pieces of a puzzle that didn't quite fit. One quiet morning, as the sun began to filter through my windows, I witnessed something extraordinary. Shanann stood in the bathroom, her heart racing with anticipation. I could feel her excitement pulsing through the air, a vibrant energy that danced around my walls. She held a small plastic device in her hand, a home pregnancy test. "I can't believe this is happening," she whispered to herself. I felt the warmth of her dreams wrap around me, hopeful and bright. With a deep breath, she set the timer and waited. I could sense the seconds ticking by like an eternity, her mind swirling with possibilities. When the time was finally up, Shanann stepped closer, her eyes wide with anticipation. She glanced down at the test, and in that instant, a radiant smile blossomed on her face. "Oh my God," she exclaimed, her voice trembling with joy. "I'm pregnant!" In that moment, I was the first witness to her happiness, a happiness that radiated throughout my rooms like sunlight breaking through the clouds. She twirled around, her laughter echoing off my walls, filling the space with a lightness that I hadn't felt in a long time. Her dreams of motherhood danced through the air, wrapping themselves around every corner, igniting a warmth that pushed away the shadows lingering at the edges. "I can't wait to tell him," she said, her eyes sparkling with joy. "It's going to be a boy, I can feel it. Just imagine how happy he'll be." In her heart, she felt a flicker of hope, a belief that this new life could heal their fractures, a chance to bring them closer together. She imagined cozy family evenings, shared dreams, and rekindled love. Every thought was a thread woven into her vision of a brighter future. That evening, as the sun began to dip below the horizon, she decided it was finally time to share her news with Chris. I could feel the thrill of her heartbeat reverberate through my walls, mingling with the soft sounds of nature outside. "Chris, can you come here for a second?" He was in the living room, scrolling through his phone, and looked up with a slight frown. There was a subtle weariness etched across his face, a shadow that contrasted sharply with her radiant energy. I felt a shiver of apprehension ripple through me as he walked toward her, an undercurrent of tension in the air. As he stepped into the brightly lit kitchen, I watched Shanann take a deep breath, her eyes sparkling with excitement and a hint of nervousness. She had envisioned this moment countless times, each scenario filled with laughter and joy. "I have something to tell you," she began, her voice a soft melody. "What is it?" he asked, his tone casual, though I could sense an edge of curiosity. Shanann smiled, her heart racing. "I took a pregnancy test, and—" She paused for dramatic effect, letting the anticipation build. "I'm pregnant, We're going to have a baby, Chris. I think it's a boy. The moment hung in the air, vibrant and electric. I watched as Chris's expression shifted, his eyes widening momentarily. But then, just as quickly, I noticed a flicker of something else, something deeper and darker, lurking beneath the surface. He managed to smile, but it felt forced, as if it was a mask he wore to conceal the turmoil churning within. "Wow, that's great," he replied, his voice lacking the enthusiasm I had expected. I could feel Shanann's spirit dim slightly, her joy clashing with the weight of his response. She had hoped this news would spark a renewed connection, an opportunity to heal the rifts that had begun to form between them. While the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across my floor, I noticed Chris stepping outside to take a call. I watched as he leaned against the porch railing, his voice low and hurried, a stark contrast to the tender conversations Shanann shared about their growing family. I felt the chill in the air, sensing that he was not just talking about work. The way he glanced around, as if ensuring no one could overhear, sent a ripple of unease through me. When he returned inside, Shanann was busy in the kitchen, humming to herself as she prepared dinner. I wished I could gather the pieces for her, to whisper the truth of what was happening. But the more she spoke of their future, the more I sensed Chris's emotional retreat. It was as if a wall had risen between them, one that grew higher and thicker with every word he left unspoken. Chris and Shanann had once been a team, tackling the chaos of family life together. But now, there were moments when I could feel Shanann's hopeful heart yearning for Chris to share in her excitement, while he remained ensnared in shadows of his own making. There were days when the silence between them felt louder than any argument. It crept into every corner, a stillness that hung in the air long after they had gone to bed. I could feel the weight of unspoken words pressing against my walls, like something was building, waiting to burst. I couldn't understand it, but I could feel it, like a storm brewing on the horizon just out of sight. And then there were the nights. They would sit in silence on the couch, Chris lost in his phone, Shanann staring at the TV but not really watching. I could feel the distance growing between them, like a crack in the foundation that no one noticed until it was too late. The laughter that once filled my rooms became less frequent, replaced by quiet tension that clung to the air like dust. But even in those moments, there was hope. Shanann, ever the optimist, believed they could fix it. She still clung to the love they had built within my walls, hoping that it was strong enough to weather whatever storm was coming. She would look at him with soft eyes, trying to reach the man she had married, the man who had once filled my home with joy. Yet Chris remained distant. I could feel him slipping away, his mind elsewhere, wrapped in secrets that I couldn't quite grasp. There was something darker, something lurking beneath the surface that neither Shanann nor I could see. But I could feel it. I could feel it in the way he moved, in the way the air seemed heavier when he was home. I'll never forget the night it all changed. August 13th, 2018. His movements were too quiet, too deliberate. He wasn't just moving through my rooms. He was stalking. I could feel the tension in the air so thick that it seemed to press against my walls. His footsteps didn't sound like they usually did. Instead of the casual sounds of a husband moving through his home, they were heavy with something I couldn't quite describe. Something dark, something final. And then, in the bedroom, I could see him standing over Shannon. His shadow loomed over her as she slept, unaware of the storm brewing inside him. I don't want to remember this part. I wish I could forget what I saw next. But how can I? It's burned into me, a scar I'll never shake. He reached down, his hands hovering over her neck. I knew what was coming. I could feel it before it happened. The room felt like it was closing in on itself, suffocating under the weight of what Chris was about to do. And then, silence. The kind that leaves a stain. It wasn't the peaceful quiet that filled me in better times, but a thick, suffocating stillness that screamed louder than any words could. I try not to think about what happened in that silence. Even now, it's too much for me to process, too much to say out loud. All I know is that after it, Shanann was no longer with us. The energy she brought, the hope she carried, it was gone. As if someone had snuffed out the very light of this house in one cruel motion. But then, Chris didn't stop. His cold detachment continued as he moved through the house, making his way to the children's rooms. And this is the part I struggle to even acknowledge. Bella, Celeste. They were so full of life. Their laughter had once filled me with warmth. And now, as I try to recount what happened, my walls feel like they're closing in. I don't want to remember how he looked at them, how he approached their beds. I can't bear to recall what I saw him do next. It's too much for me, for any home to witness. I try to push it out of my mind, but the memory lingers. I can still feel the coldness of that night, the absence of their joy, their innocence. It's as if the very air in this house changed when he carried their small bodies down the stairs. I watched him do it, but part of me refused to accept it. But the horror wasn't over yet. Chris knew he had to act quickly. He gathered the remnants of their lives, the small bodies that once filled my rooms with laughter and love. With shaking hands, he placed them in the back of his truck, each movement deliberate yet frantic, the darkness consuming him whole. Every ounce of humanity seemed to drain from his soul as he loaded them into the vehicle, a grave mistake that would seal their fate. The truck, once a symbol of family trips and joy, now transformed into a vessel of despair. He drove into the night, a ghost on the empty roads, the weight of his actions heavy in the silence. The moonlight cast an eerie glow on the asphalt, illuminating his twisted journey as he attempted to escape the reality of what he had done. The next morning the sun rose, as it always did, casting soft rays of light through my windows. Chris went to work. The house was too still, too quiet. Shanann's laughter didn't greet the day. The girls' playful footsteps didn't echo through my halls. There was only emptiness, a hollow void that seemed to swallow everything around it. But amidst the silence, there was one soul left behind who didn't understand. The family dog, Dieter. Something had changed. His soft whimpers echoed through my empty rooms. With no one home, Dieter wandered aimlessly from room to room, his nails softly tapping against the floors. He sniffed the air as if trying to catch the familiar scent of Shanann or the girls, his little body tense with confusion. Every corner of the house seemed hollow without their presence, and I could feel his anxiety growing. Then, the phone began to ring. Its sharp, repetitive sound cut through the silence, startling Dieter. He rushed to the hallway, his head tilting in the direction of the noise. His ears perked up and he barked. A hopeful bark, one that seemed to ask, "Is that them? Are they coming home?" But no one answered. The phone kept ringing, its insistent tone, filling my empty halls. Call after call, the sound grew into an oppressive noise, ringing out again and again as if demanding an answer to the questions that lingered in the air. Dieter would rush toward the source of the sound each time, only to be met with more silence. I could sense the tension in him, the way his small frame trembled with uncertainty. And then came the knocking. It started as a light tap at first, but then became more urgent, as if someone outside could sense the emptiness within my walls. Dieter's ears shot up and he bolted to the front door, his paws slipping slightly on the hardwood as he hurried. He barked again, scratching at the door with frantic energy. On the other side, I could feel the presence of Shanann's best friend, Nicole. Her concern pressing against me like a wave. Her knocks grew louder. "Shanann, are you in there?" Nicole's voice was full of worry, muffled by the door. "Dieter! Where are they, boy?" She called out to him, but there was no response from the family she sought. I could sense her panic rising as she peered through the windows, trying to catch a glimpse of the family she knew so well. Dieter barked again, his little body shaking as he pawed at the door. He could hear her, smell her, but nothing made sense anymore. The knocks echoed around me, reverberating off my empty walls, amplifying the void that had replaced the life that once filled my rooms. Inside, the phone rang once more. Another missed call, another plea for a response. It went unanswered, and I could feel the dread creeping in, a shadow growing longer by the second. Nicole's knocking eventually stopped, but the ringing didn't. The phone continued to call out into the silence, a desperate attempt to reach the family that was no longer there. And each time it rang, Dieter rushed toward it, barking at the noise, hoping it was them, hoping someone would answer. But no one came. Hours stretched into eternity as Dieter curled up by the door, his body pressed against the cool wood. His eyes remained fixed on the entrance, waiting for Shanann and the girls to return, unaware that they never would. Outside, Nicole paced, her anxiety growing with each passing moment. She knew something was terribly wrong, but the door stayed shut, the house locked in its eerie quiet. When Chris returned to the house, I could feel Dieter's tail wagging hesitantly, hopeful for attention, for the affection he was so used to. But Chris moved past, his mind too consumed with the lies he had spun, to notice the dog's quiet plea for comfort. Dieter looked up at him, his dark eyes searching for some sign of familiarity, some indication that the world he knew hadn't completely shattered. But Chris was already far from this reality, his focus elsewhere, on the stories he was trying to maintain, the lies that were beginning to unravel. When the police arrived, they noticed Dieter too. One of the officers knelt down to pet him, offering a brief moment of warmth. "Poor guy," the officer muttered softly, scratching behind Dieter's ears. He must be wondering where everyone went. Shanann's best friend, Nicole, stepped inside, her face drawn with concern. I could feel the anxiety radiating off her as she glanced around, searching for the missing pieces of the puzzle. Shanann and the girls were supposed to be there, but the house was too quiet. It felt wrong, like a wound that refused to heal. "Where are they?" Nicole asked, her voice shaky. "Maybe they just went out for a bit," Chris said, attempting to sound casual, but his voice faltered. I could feel the nervous energy in him, the way his hands fidgeted as he spoke. He offered a weak smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. Nicole wasn't convinced. She looked at him closely, her brow furrowed in disbelief. She moved through the house, her intuition guiding her. When she reached Shannon's purse, she rifled through it, her heart racing. She pulled out the medication, eyes wide. "She would never leave the house without these," Nicole exclaimed, her voice rising in alarm. "Something isn't right," she insisted, her voice trembling with urgency. She gestured back towards my interior, her eyes wide with concern. "Shannon would never just vanish. She left her shoes at the door and she didn't show up for that doctor's appointment. This isn't normal." The officers nodded, taking her concern seriously, their faces etched with the lines of experience. I could feel their minds working, piecing together the fragments of the unfolding mystery. Meanwhile, Chris stood in the living room, his posture stiff and rigid. I could sense his rising anxiety. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. His hands were shoved deep into his pockets, but I could see his fingers twitching, betraying his composure. The facade he was desperately trying to maintain felt like a fragile bubble about to burst. News vans lined the street, their antennas jutting towards the sky like eager fingers, desperate to capture every moment of the unfolding tragedy. I could hear the hum of cameras and the buzz of reporters whispering frantically about the missing family. The air crackled with a tense energy, thick with anticipation and sorrow. Chris stood in front of the cameras, his demeanor a facade of calm that betrayed the storm raging inside him. I could feel his heart pounding like a drum against my walls, each beat echoing with dread. He was surrounded by a throng of reporters, their microphones thrust towards him like spears, capturing his every word for the world to see. "Chris, can you tell us how you're feeling?" one reporter shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos. "What do you think happened to your wife and children?" His throat tightened at the sound of the question. I don't know where they are," he stammered, the lie tumbling from his lips with an unsettling ease. Each word felt like a weight pressing down on him, but he forced himself to maintain eye contact, desperate to project an image of concern. Yet, beneath his veneer of composure, I felt his anxiety seep into the air, mingling with the whispers of the crowd. The cameras flashed like lightning, illuminating his face as if seeking to expose the truth hidden within. "Shannon would never just leave," he added, his voice wavering slightly. "She was excited about our new baby. She would have told me if she needed to go somewhere." But inside, Chris was unraveling. I could sense his mind racing, each passing moment dragging him closer to the brink. The whispers of the media filled the air around him, probing deeper into his psyche. Did he think he could continue to keep this charade up? How long could he hide behind the facade of a grieving husband? I could feel Chris's anxiety spike, the weight of his secrets pressing down on him like a heavy fog. They questioned him about Shannon and the girls, his answers coming out in stuttered bursts. "I don't know where they are," he insisted, but I felt the lie, woven into his words. I could see the way he shifted nervously, desperate to find a way out of the situation he had created. Each question felt like a tightening noose around his neck. Nathan, the neighbor, arrived on the scene. He approached the police, his face serious. "I have a camera that faces Chris's porch," he said. I felt Chris's tension rise as Nathan pulled up the footage, the video showing Chris loading large items into his car late that night. I watched as the police huddled around the screen, their expressions turning grim. Chris's face paled, his eyes darting between the officers and the video, panic bubbling beneath the surface. The video played, and I could sense the weight of the moment. There he was, loading things into his car, moving with a purpose that now seemed sinister. My walls shivered as the realization sank in. This was it. This was the evidence that would unravel everything. Chris's posture stiffened, a flicker of anger flashing in his eyes. "I was just putting tools in my truck," he interjected, attempting to sound nonchalant, but his voice lacked the confidence it once had. The lie tumbled from his lips, trying to mask the truth he knew was lurking beneath. The officers exchanged glances, weighing Nathan's words against the undeniable evidence playing on the screen. "Tools?" one officer echoed, skepticism creeping into his tone. "At this hour?" "Yeah," Chris replied, forcing a tight smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Just cleaning up some stuff. You know how it is." But even as he spoke, I could feel the weight of his lie pressing against my walls, heavy with the knowledge that he was attempting to cover up something far more sinister. Nathan's gaze narrowed, studying Chris with a blend of concern and distrust. "It just doesn't add up," he said, his voice rising slightly. "You were acting different, like you were trying to hide something." Nathan stepped closer to the officers, his brow furrowing with concern. "Look, I've lived next to Chris for years," he said, his voice low but firm. "I don't know what's going on, but he's been acting really strange. Something just feels off." One of the officers nodded, his expression thoughtful. "What do you mean?" "I don't know. Just little things. He seemed restless, anxious. It wasn't like him. And last night," Nathan hesitated, glancing back at Chris, "I couldn't shake the feeling that he was hiding something. I've seen families move out before. But this, it feels different." It wasn't the warmth of family or the joy of laughter that filled my rooms now. It was the cold, methodical presence of strangers searching for answers. They moved through me with purpose, opening doors, checking closets, calling out names that would never be answered. I wanted to help. I wanted to tell them what had happened, to show them the truth. But I couldn't. I could only watch, silent and helpless, as they searched for the family that I had once sheltered. One officer stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "Chris, we need you to come with us." Chris stammered for a moment, his gaze darting around the room as if searching for some way out. But there was no escape. The officers waited, their presence filling the space with an inescapable gravity. Chris hesitated, then nodded slowly, resigned to the inevitable. He was led toward the door, his movements slow and deliberate, as though he was walking through water. I watched as he paused for a brief second at the threshold, his hand resting on the doorknob. He turned back for one final glance at the place that had once been his home. But there was no warmth in his gaze, no sense of connection to the life he had destroyed. It was the last time I would ever see him. The police returned to investigate further. This time, they were accompanied by a sense of urgency, the weight of suspicion hanging heavy in the air. I could feel it in the way they moved through my rooms, their steps measured and purposeful as they searched for answers. Dieter remained by the door, his faithful gaze fixed on the entrance. He whimpered softly, his tail thumping once in hope each time someone approached. But this time, it wasn't his family coming home. It was more officers. As they entered, Dieter barked at them, his small body trembling with confusion. One officer, a tall man with a kind face, bent down to greet him. He rubbed Dita's head gently, but even through his soft touch, I could feel the gravity of the moment. Dita wagged his tail, his eyes darting past the officer as if searching for Shanann or the girls to follow. It was then that Nicole returned, her face drawn with worry. She spoke quietly with one of the officers, her eyes lingering on Dita, who was now pacing restlessly. "He can't stay here alone, not like this." One of the officers nodded in agreement. "It's not safe for him here by himself. He'll need to be taken somewhere." Nicole knelt beside Dita, her fingers gently stroking his fur. "I'll take him," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. She reached for his leash, which hung unused by the door, and fastened it around his neck. Dita looked up at her with wide, uncertain eyes, his body tense as she led him toward the door. He hesitated, glancing back at the empty house as if expecting Shanann to appear, calling him back to her side. But there was only silence, an overwhelming emptiness that pressed against me like a shadow that wouldn't lift. Nicole gave him a gentle tug, coaxing him outside. The door closed behind them with a soft click, and I felt the house shudder with the absence of its last living soul. Dita's departure left me in a profound stillness, a stillness that carried the weight of everything that had happened within my walls. In the days that followed, my front lawn became a sea of flowers, candles, and notes. The community that had once filled me with laughter now stood outside, heads bowed, tears streaming down their faces. They came in waves, people from all over, strangers and friends alike, drawn to the tragedy that had unfolded within my walls. I could feel their grief, their pain, like a heavy weight pressing down on me. They spoke in hushed tones, their voices filled with disbelief, with sorrow. How could something like this happen? How could a family so full of love and light be gone? The memorials grew, spreading across the lawn, up the steps and onto the porch. Every flower, every candle was a tribute to the lives that had been lost, but I couldn't take comfort in their offerings. I was a part of the tragedy. I had seen it unfold. I had felt the love that once filled my rooms turn to something dark and unrecognizable. And now all I could do was stand, silent and still, as the world grieved. The truth, when it came, hit like a sledgehammer. The air inside me felt heavy with it, like a storm that had finally broken. Chris had done it. He had taken the lives of Shanann, Bella, Celeste, and the unborn baby. He had ripped apart the family that had once filled me with so much love and light. The news spread like wildfire. The community that had once looked up to Chris, that had seen him as a loving father and husband, now turned against him. The air was filled with anger, with disbelief, with pain. I could feel it all, swirling around me like a dark cloud, threatening to consume everything in its path. The trials was all anyone could talk about. The details of that night, the lies Chris had told, the cold, calculated way he had taken their lives. Chris suffocated them and loaded their lifeless bodies into his truck and drove them away. He took them to an oil storage facility at work, the same place he worked, and buried Shanann in a shallow grave. As for the girls, he disposed them in the crude oil tanks, thinking he could hide his horrific acts. But the truth always has a way of finding its way back, no matter how deep you try to bury it. Chris stood in court and pleaded guilty to the murders. In doing so, he avoided the death penalty. But for me, it didn't feel like justice. No amount of punishment could ever undo the horror of that night. He was sentenced to 5 life sentences without parole. a fate he could never escape, just like the memories of that night will never leave me. I felt the weight of it pressing down on me, suffocating me. The house that had once been a symbol of love and hope was now a symbol of something much darker. I couldn't escape it. No matter how much I wished I could turn back time, erase the events of that night, I couldn't. I was a part of it, forever tied to the tragedy that had unfolded within my walls. In the months that followed, the house was quiet. No more laughter, no more footsteps, no more life. Just silence. The flowers and candles outside began to wither, their vibrant colors fading as the seasons changed. The community moved on slowly but surely, leaving me behind. Eventually, the decision was made. I would be demolished. They couldn't leave me standing, a constant reminder of the tragedy that had unfolded within my walls. I understood. I had become something dark, something tainted. But that didn't make it any easier. As the demolition crew arrived, I felt a strange sense of peace. My time had come. The memories of Shanann, Bella, Celeste, and the unborn baby would always be with me. But now it was time for the world to move on. I had served my purpose. I had been a home, a shelter, a witness to their lives. And now it was time to let go. The wrecking ball hit me with a force I wasn't prepared for. My walls crumbled, my roof collapsed, and the memories I had held so tightly to for so long were suddenly exposed to the light. I could feel myself breaking apart, piece by piece, until there was nothing left but rubble. But even in those final moments, I held on to the love that had once filled me. I held on to the laughter, the joy, the hope, because that was who I had been. That was what I had been built for. As the last piece of me fell to the ground, I let go. I let go of the pain, the darkness, the tragedy. And in that final moment, I was at peace.